Robert T. Kiyosaki, Rich Dad's Guide to Investing. What the rich invest in that the poor and middle class do not. Which sounds better, being financially comfortable or being rich? Deep down, most people want to be filthy rich, but they also tend to feel that the future is already decided for them, and that they'll never actually be rich. But how rich you are or aren't is up to you. If you make the decision to be rich and adopt the mindset of the rich, there's no reason at all why you can't achieve that goal. First, however, there are a few things you'll need to learn, as there are no get-rich-quick schemes that actually work. In practice, becoming rich means investing in financial education and literacy until analyzing financial statements becomes second nature. It also means learning how to create and grow a business, and then using the experience and money you've accumulated to make more and better investments. The first step, though, is to get the right frame of mind and go from saying, "I'll never be rich," to "I'm going to be rich, and this is how." Blink number 1. The richest 10% have 90% of the money because they invest in a way that the poor and middle classes do not. Maybe you've heard of the 80-20 rule, which states that 80% of our success comes from 20% of our efforts. Well, that might be true for overall success, but for money, the rule is 90-10, because when it comes down to it, 10% of people have 90% of the money. The rule applies in many walks of life. Think about Hollywood stars, and then think how many actors are waiting tables between gigs. Yep, 10% of actors earn 90% of the money. The same goes for athletes, musicians, and of course, investors. A Wall Street Journal article confirmed this, noting that 10% of the population own 90% of all the shares in the United States. Why is it that rich people can accumulate so much wealth? Well, one reason is that some investments are simply off limits if you're poor. Back when he was a young man with little cash, the author asked his rich friends if he could get involved in their business deals. But despite their friendship, the answer was always no. Not because they didn't want to help him out, but because it would have been illegal. In the United States, the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission restricts certain investments to accredited investors. That is, people with a net worth of $1 million or a consistent annual income of $200,000. Anyone who is worth or makes less than that simply isn't allowed to get involved. Now, there are good reasons for preventing people without much money in the bank from making potentially risky investments. But these rules also prevent poorer people from making the best investments, the investments of the rich. So how can you break into that top 10%? In the following blink, we'll find out what it takes to think like a rich person. Blink number 2. The first step toward being rich is to adopt the mindset of the rich. Get an education, work hard, save money. Then you'll be fine. Sound familiar? This sentence sums up the standard middle-class approach to financial security, and more likely than not, you were probably told something similar by your parents. But here's the thing. This advice will never make you rich. Rather, it will keep you in the 90% that only has 10% of the money. So how do the rich approach financial gain? They certainly don't toil away at one job until retirement. Instead, they purchase businesses and make investments. Why is that? Well, for starters, because employees inevitably have less money to invest. That's just the way the U.S. tax system is set up. For example, let's say you want to save $1,000 from your salary. Well, first you have to pay tax, so in order to save that $1,000, you'll have to earn, say, $1,300. Inflation will reduce your savings value every year, and you'll pay tax on the interest you earn. Doesn't sound like a recipe for wealth, does it? Business owners, on the other hand, have more money to invest because it comes out of their pre-tax earnings. Unlike the employee who has to save out of taxed income, a business owner first buys assets and then pays taxes. As such, an employee has less money to invest in assets that can generate wealth. It doesn't sound fair, but it's the way the system works. It's hard for an employee to become rich because she gives so much money to the government first. And there's another reason why business ownership and investment are better paths to riches. Investors often face less risk than employees. Lots of people rely on employment, savings, and pensions for their financial security. But the old notion of a stable job for life just doesn't apply in today's job market. Employees get fired all the time. What happens to a company's share price when it lets lots of employees go? Very often, it goes up. So being on the investor side of the table is usually less risky than being on the employees. Blink number 3. Financial literacy can unlock riches. Can you explain the difference between assets and liabilities? Or calculate a company's price to equity and debt to equity ratios? Many people shy away from investing because the terminology sounds like a foreign language. If you want to get into that 10%, however, it's time to invest in your financial education. First off, it's important to understand the difference between assets and liabilities. Rich people never confuse the two, but others mix them up all the time. And that's one of the reasons rich people tend to make better financial decisions. Let's take a common example. You've probably heard a homeowner say something like, "My home is a great asset." Sounds sensible enough, right? But usually it's downright wrong. Something is only an asset when it generates positive cash flow. That is, when it brings in money. Say your house is worth $200,000 with a $150,000 mortgage. Where does the cash flow? Not in, but out, through your mortgage, fees, insurance, and so on. Sure, maybe one day you'll sell it for a tidy profit, but you have no guarantees, so it's actually a liability. Understanding assets and liabilities is a great first step, but to successfully make the investments of the rich, to develop real estate or buy into a business, you need to have a deep understanding of financial terminology. Let's say you want to buy shares in a growing tech business and you want to understand whether it's a good deal. How can you figure it out? Well, the share price tells you little. So to really understand value, you'll need to calculate and analyze measures like debt to equity ratio, return on equity, cash on cash return, and financial leverage. All in all, if you don't even know that your mortgaged house is a liability, not an asset, it's no surprise that you might think the investments of the rich are too risky. Anything seems risky if you can't understand it. So spend time developing your financial education. It may be the best investment you ever make. Blink number 4. There are different kinds of investors requiring different skill sets and attitudes. When we think of investors, we often imagine besuited Wall Street bankers or bustling men shouting on a trading floor. But the word investor can be applied to a range of people, from bond traders to business founders. The taxonomy of investors begins with accredited and qualified investors. These two are outsiders. We've already met the accredited investor, someone with a high salary or established wealth who meets the legal requirements for the widest possible choice of investments. Qualified investors are just as wealthy as accredited investors, but they're also financially educated. They're equipped to analyze a business's financials or the reasons behind market movements. But both are always on the outside. Sure, they may buy shares and prosper that way, but they have little control over their assets. In contrast, an inside investor creates assets instead of buying them. The inside investor builds her own business, be it a real estate agency, a tech startup, or something else entirely. That business can become a valuable asset, and she can use it to generate income, or eventually sell it. To truly be the top dog, a sophisticated investor, the inside investor has to use the experience of building her own business to learn how to analyze other companies from the outside. The sophisticated investor knows how to make tax and the law work to her advantage. We'll take a look at how in the final blink. But first, let's look at how you can become an insider and start accessing the investment opportunities of the rich. It's time to get down to business. Blink number 5. If you aren't yet rich, become an inside investor. Starting a business is an achievable route to wealth. Many people think I could never start my own business, but just 120 years ago, 85% of Americans were independent farmers or small shopkeepers. In other words, the vast majority of Americans were business people, and you can be one too. Anyone can start a business and become rich. If you want to become an accredited or qualified investor, you already need to be wealthy. But starting a business only requires a bit of creativity. The author is a case in point. As a child, he created his first business from nothing. He saw that a local store was discarding old comic books and persuaded them to let him take the discards. He then opened a profitable comic library, charging school friends a 10-cent membership fee. From nothing but a good idea, he built an asset. One reason many people hold back is time and money. You've got to pay the bills, so you don't want to give up your job, right? How the heck are you going to find the time to start a business? But it's entirely possible to start a business part-time, and some of the world's finest business leaders did just that. Michael Dell started Dell Computers by working part-time in his university dorm room, and eventually got so rich that he decided to drop out. Jeff Bezos started Amazon part-time, working out of a garage, and today, his company is worth over $500 billion. Imagine if he hadn't had the courage to start things up in his spare time. Once you have a business, you have options. You can reinvest the cash it generates into other assets. You can grow the business and sell it, or you can take it public. All three can be routes to riches you'll never experience as an employee. All of us have the potential to start a business, but maybe we don't know how. In the next blink, let's take a look at the key principles for making a business work.